Welcome to the Finjan Show. I'm your host, Faris Alami. Thanks for joining today. One of the things that seems to be a big topic and sometimes is pushed under the table is the startup success or failure. And many times I've seen people tell me that it's 80%, 70%, 60%, 40%, everything else in between. And what we don't know is the exact number. What we do know is some of the facts that, based on the SBA, at least in the US, tells us what percentage of businesses stay open after X number of years, what percentage of businesses continue to stay open after X number of other years. And that's about it, 1 year, 5 years, 7 years, whatever number of years. But it would probably take a lot to go through each one of these numbers and figure out what happened exactly to those businesses that either failed or closed or no longer in business. Excuse me. Let me explain. Just because a business no longer exists does not mean that it failed. It could have been purchased. It could have been transferred. It could have been changed ownership. It could have been merged with another business. We don't really know those kinds of details in a way that makes it really clear. Now, there are some studies, of course, out there, and there are many researchers that have done it, and I encourage you to go find them and look at them and understand them. In general, what we do know is that maybe the entrepreneur chooses to close that business or move forward with something else. The entrepreneurs evolves to be something, and they might open other businesses. And while maybe one business might have closed from their perspective, they're ready to open another one. And this is why it's so important to talk about, it's not necessarily just the success that is needed to be celebrated, but also the failure that needs to be celebrated. Now, I'm not saying to throw a party because we're closing a business down. What I'm suggesting is it's okay to have someone not do as well as they expected with the business. Because at the end of the day, the business might have failed, but the entrepreneurs did not. Now, they might have failed to do some things to make it work. They might have failed to listen to the market. They might have failed to understand that the product maybe is too early. They might have failed to connect with the right people for that product. All those things are possible and sometimes are real. What I'm saying, though, is let's not make it a block for entrepreneurs to move forward. One of the things that I'll never forget is in the funding space, especially in the micro small business world. We're talking about $1,000 or $500 to maybe, $100,000. We do know, according to at least Kiva and many others in their space, that 80% of those loans will never get paid back. Now, that's a shocker to many people, and I understand and respect that. But you have to remember that when you have no resources and you getting some limited resources, those can be misused or mishandled, or the person is so excited about the program or the idea, never took the time to understand what would really take, nor had to do what it takes to make it work. For those who have no choice, they usually figure it out. They usually make sure that they figure out a way to make it work. Getting a second job, keeping their overhead low, doing whatever it takes to make it work usually is something that they could figure out. But for those who maybe not having other choices, when a speed bump shows up, they might choose to throw the towel. And that's where you see these numbers come up. Also, sometimes what we've learned through our work is that the entrepreneur is missing an education component to utilize the funding the best way. So they take the money, but they unfortunately pay the wrong resources for the wrong product or services, or for the wrong things that they might not need at the time. So understanding when to deploy your resources, whether it's your time or your money, and how to deploy it and how often you deploy it is part of the equation of understanding the success and failure of the business. Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll continue these discussions. Startups, success, and failure. Welcome back. Thanks for being here with us. This is the Finjan Show. I'm your host, Faris Alami, and we're talking today about success for the startup or failure. And the reason I wanted to continue this discussions, and by the way, anything that we're talking about here, as you know, we're doing, I'm going to call them micro podcasting, 10 minutes or less, some a little bit longer, but usually about 10 minutes is where we're hovering. And occasionally I've gone back and taken some of the entrepreneurs and dug a little deeper with them to have an hour or so conversation. What you will notice is that the discussion is not meant to be right or wrong, but it's meant more of a conversation starter. I want to bring some of these topics to the table because a lot of times we don't really talk about them, or we talk about them and we have misconceptions or misunderstanding of each one of them. And having been lucky to work in hundreds of countries, 100 countries around the world, and thousands of entrepreneurs in all kinds of industries, all types of entrepreneurs, from tech to non-tech to manufacturing to everything else between, it became really clear to me that I had the obligation to bust some of these myths. Because sure, I've heard all kinds of stuff. You can't succeed in your business unless you do X, Y, Z. And the truth is, I've actually seen people succeed in business despite that they might have never done A, B, or C that you suggested that they should do. Sometimes it's the circumstances, the timing, the country. There are all kinds of things that play a role. Anyone that tells me this is the only way to do it, I always, in the back of my ear, say, this is the only way not to do it. And the reason I say that, because each person's experience is really going to craft how that person's going to perform or not perform. My personal journey, my personal background, my personal way of getting here is probably going to get me a different place in different times based on how I think and what I've learned through my own journey. Now, I'm not saying that I can't learn from other people's journeys. And by the way, I'm not saying that other people can't learn from other people's journeys. What I'm saying is sometimes it's just a little bit different. And I've used this example many times because I said this before, entrepreneurship is nothing more than a practice. Now, there are some, I'm going to call it signs that could allow you to think that something will happen, but it's not necessarily always true. There are signs that are going to make you think that this is going to work really well, but it's not necessarily really true. One of the entrepreneurs I worked with, really early stage, that took his company IPO, told me that the first sale that they did was a disaster. As a matter of fact, they had to redo it, and they still were able to take their company public. Why? Because they were able to call and say, hey, we made a mistake. Can we fix it? What can we do to make it up? Give us another chance. And guess what? The second time, they also made a mistake. Now, most of us would think those kinds of opportunities would never exist. And this is why I said to you before, it's a practice. The person, the connection, the timing, all those things have part of the factors of what could make or break a success of a business or a failure of a business. And this is why we don't want to disregard the individuals failing a business, because it just could be part of their journey. One thing I learned from one of the other speakers is that you don't get rid of your family members just because they failed school. But why would you do that when you fund an entrepreneur to start a business and you say, well, they failed, so they no longer can be part of our network? Well, they failed. Did they learn anything or did they not? If they didn't learn anything, then maybe yes. But if they learned something, then maybe you should be part of your network and they should be celebrated. Now, not a big party, like I mentioned earlier, but the idea is let's give them another chance. As long as they understand what they could do different next time. Excuse me. So startup success or failure, no right or wrong, it's just a journey. And it's part of the startup journey. I hope that this podcast brings some of these discussions to the table and keep you engaged with your entrepreneurs in your community. Thanks for being with us here today. I'm your host, Faris Alami, and you are here at the Finjan Show.